Hey, this is Tom. How you doing? All right, now, I wanted to make sure I cut this video because I've gotten, I don't know, probably 1,000 people that want to know what to do about negotiating a pay plan because I happen to throw that terminology into Math of the Money, which is the video I sent out to an enormous amount of people, and they go, geez, that was great math, but you mentioned that, you got to make sure you negotiate the right pay plan. How do you negotiate the right pay plan? So that's what this video is about, so I hope you like it. All right, now first off, how to negotiate a pay plan. The first thing that we have to do is we have to understand the dealership's perspective on this. If you don't understand the dealership's perspective, then your arguments are going to mean nothing. You can't get into a negotiation without knowing what's on the other side, without understanding the person or the people on the other side. It's just like selling cars, right? It's just like VSM, the selling methodology. You have to know everything about what's going on and all the problems that exist over here before you arrive at solutions. So don't start negotiating a pay plan until you know for sure. Well, I'm going to help you with that right now. The dealership's perspective is that they will afford only a percentage of gross profitability from a departmental standpoint. All right, now, depends on the manufacturer, depends on not necessarily the part of the country, but sometimes it depends on that, where dealerships will pay somewhere between 14 and about 18% of their gross profitability to their sales representatives. All right? So that's a figure that it's important that you understand at least, because a dealer, they can kind of switch pay plans all over the place, make things look cool and better, and by the end of the game, they're still paying the same percentage they want to pay. All right? Now, that's not a bad thing. That's the dealer taking care of the business. All right, so now, this is what dealers, and what we hold on to a lot. However, and that's why I got the but statement here, dealers will consider additional savings, right? Because when you explain to a car dealer or a manager that you'll get additional savings by looking at this particular pay plan, and you'll see how it's going to work out for both of us, it'll be something that'll be interesting to them. Okay? All right, so I'm not asking for a greater percentage of your total gross profitability. What I'm saying is that as I continue to gross you more, you will actually save more so that the percentage won't go up anyways. It'll end up going down. Let me explain why. That's what you're going to say to the manager, all right? Again, I'll lay out a PDF on this whole thing. Click on it down below and you'll see the whole thing, but I want to explain it first, okay? So, you're going to have to start this whole thing by asking 3 questions. Now, these 3 things are the most important questions that you ask when negotiating a pay plan. If you do not ask these questions, you will not be able to negotiate a pay plan. Why? Because managers and dealers, they're pretty firm and stuck in the pay plans that they already have. They don't want you to come in and rock the boat, right? But they do want you to come in and produce more and potentially save them more money. Interesting, isn't it? So it sounds like it's a one thing or the other, like it's some attack position that you have to put yourself into, but it's not. It's helping out both parties so that the transaction turns out to be fair. Now, see, don't you love that? I keep using that term. Sounds fair, doesn't it? People love it. All right. Here are the 3 questions. First off, as you're talking to the manager or whoever it is you talk to about these things, sometimes it's human resources. All right, all right, first off, can I ask you a question? Great. Is it, do you gross more dollars with people that you know or people you don't? Meaning gross profitability per deal. Do you gross more for people you know or people you don't know? Right? Now, if you don't know the answer to this, I'm about to tell you. You'll gross more off people you know. All right? I'm not necessarily talking about grandma. I'm talking about people that you have relationships with, that already have trust in you. By the way, you should gross more off grandma, by the way. I'm a believer in that. But at the same time, previous clients, do you gross more off those folks? Or the people you don't know, the people that just walked in, that they're loyal to no one? Of course, it's people you know. That's critical to the negotiation, that fact. All right? Number 2, which has a higher closing percentage. I call it penetration ratio, but car dealers have the tendency to use that terminology. So a higher closing ratio. You have a higher closing ratio with people you know or people you don't know. Well, that's pretty easy too. People you know, higher closing ratio and higher gross profitability. You see the pattern that's building here? People you know are pretty important to you. And then finally, the third question is typical salespeople. And this is what you ask the manager. All right, and the last thing I want to ask you is that your typical salesperson, Jimmy, do they sell more to the dealer's customer, meaning the customer that the dealer brings in with their marketing dollars and their service and all that stuff? Or does the typical salesperson sell to their own customer base? What's the typical salesperson do? Now, that's an easy one. The typical salesperson waits for the dealer to do all the work. Right? By the way, that's when the typical salesperson sells like 6.5 or 7 vehicles a month because they keep waiting. Right? And the dealer's not going to, make you wealthy because they're doing all the work and they're just plopping people in front of you. Right? So, these are the critical things. People you know, you gross more on. People you know, you have a higher closing ratio. And typical salespeople sell to these people, but extraordinary salespeople do what? Sell to their own customer base. Okay, now, I'm going to cut the video for a second, and I'm going to come back because I'm going to have different stuff written on the board. I'll see you in just a minute. Thanks. All right, so here we are for part 2. Now, the first was the dealer perspective, right? Now we're going to go second, which is your perspective. Now, what I'm going to show you up here is what I believe is a very strong negotiated pay plan that is fair and works well for both parties. Remembering this, is that this type of pay plan, this type of structure, needs to be based upon your ability to bring clients to the table. All right? You ought to be able to bring at least a 1-to-1 ratio. You bring one client that you sell, and the dealer brings you one that you sell. But what dealers love mostly is a 2-to-1 ratio. You bring 2 to the dealer bringing 1. That drops their cost per client to get by 2/3, you see? So normally in a car dealership, it costs like $475 to all the marketing money and such to get a client. Let's say $500 to make it easy, depends on where you are in the country. If you do a 2-to-1 ratio, you're dropping their cost for getting the client down to $250. All right. If you do a 2-to-1 ratio, you're dropping it down to like $135 or whatever it is, something like that, $160. But you see the importance of that is that the dealership can save an enormous amount of money because you are the type of salesperson that can bring your own clients to the table. Now, what did we just see before? Is that when you bring your own clients, your penetration ratio is higher, and your gross profitability is higher. And that third one, you cost the dealership less money because you're doing the marketing work. You see, it all is a win. Now, if you're sitting out there listening to me going, yeah, but what if I can't? If the question that comes to your mind is, what if I can't? Man, you're not thinking like a pro. You're thinking like an amateur. Don't look for the worst case scenario. Look for the best and go, all I have to do is do what the best people do and I'll get there, which is what I'm telling you to do. So here we go. Your perspective. First, you want to make a $550 average per deal, right? Now, I use that figure in Math of the Money so you can see how to make $100, $150, or $200,000 a year. All right? Now, to make the $550, I wanted to show you a structure of a pay plan that will work to get you beyond that, because like I said before, is that there's some guys I train that get $750, $850 per vehicle. Pretty awesome, right? So here we go. Let's assume that your payable on any particular deal is $1,500 of the gross, $1,900 of the gross, or $2,200 of the gross. Now, your pay plan might be 25% of the gross. It might be 40%. It might be 30% or anything like this. What I did, I based this off a 25% plan because that is the biggest plan that exists out there, and that usually comes with a $500 pack. Now, if you haven't heard of pack before, it's this, is that if the gross profitability between what the vehicle costs and what you actually sell it for is $2,000, the dealership will pack it $500, which means they'll take $500 out of the gross for the dealership, and they'll tell you it's for other things. It doesn't matter, because your gross payable then on that is $1,500. Even though the gross was $2,000, the pack was $500, and they took it out, so you're left with $1,500. Okay, now, there's plenty of people out there that do like a 40% commission rate, but the pack is $1,200 or $1,300. So, I mean, it's all over the place. Is that you just have to do the math. It works. But pay attention, because even the guys that are at that 40% with a mega high pack might want to switch that around to the dealer and say, look, I'd like to get paid 25%, but just with a $500 pack. Okay? Now, I just said a ton there. I don't want you to get confused by it, because when you see these numbers, it shouldn't be that confusing. This is the gross profitability number on the transaction that you get paid on. You better know the figure you get paid on at your dealership. So I use 3 examples. $1,500 on one deal, $1,900 on another deal, $2,200 on another deal, whatever. Okay? With a 25% commission structure, for this type of gross profitability, you'll get paid $375. For this type of gross, $475, and for $2,200, you will get your $550. That means consistently you'll want to average $2,200 in gross payable profitability on average to make the $550 and 25% commission structure. Okay? Now, you averaging this, I don't know if you got it in you. I mean, there's a couple guys out there that average $3,000 per. All right? I know a couple of monster guys that do that stuff, so they're on mega pay plans, but they're telling me that they gross that much. But I got to tell you, I find very few people that can gross $3,000 a vehicle right now, unless you're selling some high-end vehicles, Lexus, BMW, that type of thing, because the vehicles are more limited, right? The more plentiful vehicles are, the gross profitability starts dropping. Even the Lexus guys will tell you that. The BMW guys, they don't see that so much because there's just a finite amount of BMWs that are sold. So the gross profitability on those are huge, but most of those guys don't sell 15, 20, 25 a month, okay? So I said a lot there. Well, let's just stick with the figures here and follow me. Now let's say you negotiated up to a 28% commission structure. All right? Then, on this type of payable, you'd be paid $420 at $1,900, $532. You see the jump is about $80 here. And at $2,200, you'd be paid $616 on a 28% structure. All right? And then finally, 30% would pay you $500 on the 15, $570 on the 19, and $660 on the 2,200. Now, these are really strong numbers. But then you might ask, well, geez, how am I going to ask for this? Why would anybody pay me that? Well, the only reason they pay you, and the way that you negotiate this, is based upon how many vehicles you sell. Because again, if you're selling 20 vehicles a month, or let's just say for that round number, 15, if you're selling 20 vehicles a month or 15 vehicles a month, and half of the vehicles sold are people you brought to the table, their cost structure has been cut in half. All right, so follow me over here, okay? So let's say it costs $500 to get a client at the dealership. $500 to get one client, all right? That means if you sell 20, all right, but it's a 1-to-1 ratio, so they spent $5,000 to get those 10 clients, equals 10 clients, right? But you sold 20, their total cost per client is now down to $250 per client. So they actually saved $5,000 having you on the team bringing clients to them, you see? Because if you weren't there, but they needed to sell all those vehicles, they'd have to hire 2, 3 of the typical sales guys, the monkeys, the amateurs, who bring nobody to the table, and they have to spend $500 per client to bring them to the dealership to sell them. You see? You saved the dealership $5,000 by you doing your own marketing. All right? Now, maybe the dealership kicks in some of that, so maybe you save them $4,000. That's a lot of money to save, and you ought to be able to participate in that $4,000. Okay? So, it's based upon how many vehicles you sell. All right, so at 28%, I think that if you sell 15 vehicles, they ought to move you up to 28%. I think that if you sell 20 vehicles, they ought to move you up to 30%. That's what I think. And I think it's a good sell based upon this. I mean, I said that lightly, but of course it's a good sell. It makes all the sense in the world. And if you're somebody who brings these type of numbers to the table, then you have leverage. That's how it goes. They don't want to lose you. All right? So, that's how you get that thing done. And then, I believe you also ought to get bonus based upon other things, other income that you bring to the organization. Those are things like a gross bonus. All right, so now, let's say it cost them $500 to bring a client, but you're grossing huge numbers, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. I think you ought to get a bonus when you hit those big numbers. So if you reach a $4,000 bonus, they give you an extra $50 on that. $5,000, an extra $75, $6,000, an extra $100. Okay? Pinstripes. Pinstripes are a gold mine, all right? People love to make their vehicles their own, and pinstripe, to do it, is dirt cheap if it's stick-on. You know, the paint stuff is a heck of a lot more expensive, and I never suggest painting on vehicles. Some people love it, but, you know, anyways. But pinstripe packages, I just put down some random prices. For a $295 pinstripe package, I think you ought to get $50. For a $495, you ought to get $75, and for $695, you ought to get $100. Why? Because the cost of doing this is somewhere around $65, something like that, $75. All right, so that means the profit is strong. You ought to be able to participate somewhere around this level. You see? So that's legitimate. Vehicle protection, things like rust proofing or electronic rust mechanisms or whatever, you know, a Scotch guard of the seating if it's not already on there, and in a windshield protectant. And I don't want to go through all the stuff because that's not where I am. Is that I just wanted to put it down as protection so I don't confuse you, and I think it ought to lay out like this. If you sell a $500 package, you ought to get $50. An $800 package, you ought to get $75. An $1,100 package, you ought to get $100. If there's packages beyond that, you ought to get paid more. Service contract. If you participate in selling a service contract to a client, I think you ought to get $50. If you participate in selling a maintenance contract, that's those contracts where, you know, the oil changes and such are paid up front when they buy the vehicle. That way they don't have to pay each time they come in. Anyone you get involved in, I think they ought to pay you $25 per. And then, of course, there are accessories. I put depends on here because accessories, there's so many different ones, so many different manufacturers in all different parts of the country and then parts of the world. I didn't want to come up with one that you could go by. I like a percentage with a minimum. But there you go. So anyway, if you pull off the numbers like this, 20 numbers where you're getting paid somewhere up here and you're adding this to it, you'll find your average make per vehicle is going to be $650, $700, again up to that $850 per. Now think about that. 20 vehicles a month for 12 months, 240 vehicles. You take 240 vehicles and you multiply that by $800 per. How much is that? $175,000, $180,000 a year? Probably more than that. I don't know. I'm not doing the math on you right here. But I wanted to show you, because this is about negotiating, because I already did the math about the money video anyways. So there you go, everybody. That is how you negotiate a plan. and it's based upon numbers that the dealership understands and they badly want to get. Remember, your pay plan should not go up when you're selling 10 cars a month. You can't negotiate a bigger pay plan if you're a 10-car-a-month person. It means you're not bringing anybody to the table. You're just going through the transaction. Doesn't mean you're not decent at the job, but you're not a superstar yet. You start reaching towards superstar at 15, at 20. People know you're really good. Then you hit 25, 30. Holy mackerel! It's crazy, right? I mean, that type of money is great. And so there you have it, everybody. I put a PDF down below so you can look through it and see what you think. If you have questions for me, put them down at the bottom of the video and let me know what you think. So there you go. This is Tom. I'll see you on the next video. Adios.